Would you believe it that this footage came from the iPhone 15 Pro? Today's video is all about how to get the very best, most cinematic footage from the iPhone 15 Pro. This video is going to help your footage stand out and not look like it came from a smartphone. In fact, Apple filmed an entire event in October of 2023 using the iPhone 15 Pro. They did a behind-the-scenes video, and while that video is short and doesn't get into a lot of detail, there are several hints in that video that show exactly how Apple got the very best footage from this camera. Today's video not only incorporates those hints, but also hours and hours of experimenting and testing that I've done with this camera. Now, one of the interesting things about the Apple launch that used the iPhone 15 Pro is Apple did not use their own camera app. Instead, Apple used a free camera app from Blackmagic Design. And the app from Blackmagic is key because that app enables us to have full control over the exposure triangle, and it also lets us get some real precise settings that will help us get the very best footage. If you don't already have the Blackmagic Cam app installed on your iPhone 15 Pro, you'll want to go to the App Store and type in Blackmagic Cam. So I'm now going to show you the exact settings I use in the Blackmagic Cam app to get that cinematic footage. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go down to Settings here, and under the Record here, we're going to go up here to Codec. And for the codec, you want to select either Apple ProRes 422 right here, or the H.265. Now, I recommend the HEVC because it's going to give you a lot smaller file size without compromising the quality. For the resolution, you definitely want to select 4K. 4K is going to get you the best from this camera. I don't recommend using anything else here. This is one of the most important settings that you can choose here. For the color space, you want to choose Apple Log HDR. That's going to be the color space that gives you that flat, ungraded profile that you can then grade later on and get the very best quality. And it's not going to have the Apple sharpness baked into it. When you take standard video from a smartphone, it's usually very sharp and it just doesn't look great. So this setting right here is key. The rest of these settings here, you can leave alone. You don't have to change them. Under camera, for the shutter measurement, we want to select angle, and I'll explain why in a little bit, but that is a key setting right there. And then for lens correction, we want to make sure that's selected, and lock current orientation, we want to select that as well. For the audio, I just keep that here as the default. If you want really good professional audio, I do recommend using an external mic, such as this wireless mic, or one that you can connect into your phone. It's going to get you the very best audio. For monitor, you want to make sure you select display histogram and display storage status. I like to keep track of my storage space just to make sure I'm not running out of space. So I like to have that there as well. One other setting you want to use here is under LUTs. You want to choose display LUT. And the reason for that is you want to have a pretty good idea of what your footage is going to look like later on after you grade it. And using that display LUT here is going to help. And the nice thing is the newest version of Blackmagic Cam actually has the LUT from Apple that converts the Apple Log to Rec 709 color space. So you want to select that right there. It's already built into the app. You don't have to download it anywhere. It's right there. And the rest of these settings, you can leave alone. Now, we're going to go up under the camera, and we're going to change a couple settings here. First one is the lens. For the lens, I recommend using the standard 24mm lens for all of your recording. That's going to give you the best quality, and it's also going to make sure there's not any weird distortion in your video. Now, if you do want to do telephoto, you could use the 75mm, and that will still give you good results, but I don't recommend using the ultra-wide 13mm. I recommend doing 24 or 77. 77 should only be used if there's a really good use case to have that telephoto. For the frames per second, this is going to depend on what you want to do with the footage. I recommend doing 24 or 30 frames per second if you're just talking to the camera or if you want normal speed. But if you do have something you want to slow down later, I recommend going to 60 frames per second because you can put that on a 24 frames per second timeline and have it go 40% of the original speed, or you can put that on a 30 frames per second timeline and have it go 50% of the original speed. But for now, I'm going to go back to 24. That is my favorite frames per second to use just for normal speed. Right here, shutter angle. You want to set this to 180 degrees. This is a key setting. This is going to give you that cinematic motion blur This camera I'm talking to right now has a shutter angle at 180 also. So when I'm in 24 frames per second, my shutter speed is going to be 1/48 or 1/50. Some cameras will do the exact 1/48, others will do 1/50, but visually it looks the same. And that is what's represented by a shutter angle of 180. That's going to be a shutter speed that's twice the frames per second. And you want to hit this lock symbol up here. You want to keep your shutter angle locked at that. You don't want it changing on you. Now the iris right here, that is the aperture in the camera. And that is the one variable of the 3 in the exposure triangle that we can't change. That's static on the Apple camera. You can't change that. You have to keep that value there. The next setting we want to change here at the top is ISO. Now ISO is going to be dependent on where you're filming, but during the Apple event, Apple used the lowest possible ISO when filming. That's kind of a hint into what gets you the best results from this camera. Now granted, Apple was filming in low light indoors, and they had very precise lighting setup. But I like to generally keep the ISO as low as possible, and I like to keep it anywhere between this lowest value of 64 to about a max of 400 or so. I don't generally like to go over 400. Theoretically, the best dynamic range is found between an ISO of 1100 and 1400. However, when you get to ISOs that high, it becomes very difficult to film during the day, even with ND filters on here. That ISO is so high, you're at a great risk of overexposing your footage and having footage that's not usable later on. So at least starting off, I recommend keeping the ISO low and as low as possible. It's going to give you the least amount of noise in your footage. So once you've mastered that, then it's worth experimenting with those higher ISOs to get a little bit extra dynamic range, but the dynamic range in log is still great at these ISO levels. Next value we want to change here is the white balance. White balance, I generally do 5000K if I'm filming during the daytime like this, but if you want a slightly warmer image, you can go up to about 5500K, and that's going to give you good results as well. If you are filming at sunrise or sunset, 6500K is what I like to go with. Once you've set it, you want to make sure you lock it right up here. And for the tint, just make sure the tint is set to 0. If you need to adjust the tint later on when doing color grading, I'm going to show you how to do that. But for now, keep that set to 0. We next want to click on this box at the top, and we want to go to our histogram. So the histogram is going to help you make sure you're not filming footage that's overexposed. Like right now, this footage is overexposed. I like to set it at 85%. It's going to help you see if any of your highlights are clipping, and it's going to help you prevent that when recording. And I also like to have the grid on here. So the third one down, I like to set the grid right there. And then the final setting we want to change right here below the record button is the stabilization. So in the Apple event, one of the hints they gave is they probably did not have stabilization turned on the iPhone. It probably was turned off. They had the iPhone mounted on some very nice dollies and other gear where they can move it around smoothly and not need the stabilization. So if you do have a smartphone gimbal that you can use, ideally you want to use it on the gimbal as much as possible. If you don't have a gimbal, standard is a good option here. Standard will work pretty well, and the stabilization is generally going to look pretty good. But gimbal stabilization is going to get you the very best looking footage. And then I'm just going to show you down here, if I didn't have that Apple LUT on, if I turned it off, that's what the footage would look like. It would be very flat. But as you can see with the LUT on, that footage still looks really bad right now. This would not be a good setting, and that's because we need ND filters when we're shooting in daylight like this with a frames per second of 24 and a shutter angle at 180 degrees. So my favorite ND filter set to use with the iPhone 15 Pro are these ones right here from Freewell. The first one that they include is this case right here. So what you do is you mount your iPhone in this case, and it's super easy to put in there. But the key is the case has this metal mount on the back where you can attach all your filters. And a lot of them attach magnetically, but some of them do also pop into place as well. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And this set right here is a great value from Freewell. Highly recommend it. This has been my favorite set to use, and I've gotten a lot of use out of these. The set includes a Bluetooth selfie grip as well, which is really nice. You can use this like a camera to push a button. And when it comes to the actual lenses, the variable ND 1 to 5 stops right here is the one that I pretty much use all the time when I'm filming, unless I'm using the anamorphic lens right here. You can't pair the anamorphic lens with an ND filter. But that's really not a big deal because the anamorphic is primarily meant for lower light and to get some of those cool blue lighting effects with light in lower light. But if you want to use this in normal daylight hours, you generally are not going to be able to use the 180-degree shutter angle rule because your footage will be too overexposed. So keep that in mind with this. The other filter I really love in this set is the diffusion snow mist filter right here. Another filter that's really useful is the circular polarizer right here. This one helps you eliminate a lot of that light pollution and brightness on a really sunny day. It'll help you get richer blues in the sky and just overall better colors. So I'm going to show you how to mount the variable ND filter first on the back of the case so that you can see how to do that. And then I'll show you how to use that ND filter to properly expose your footage. The freewell filters come in a nice magnetic case, and they've also got a nice rubber lens cap on them that helps protect them. So if you look at the filter right here, there's these two white symbols on the back. And what those correspond to is they correspond to a symbol here on the back of the camera. So what we want to do is we want to line up one of those symbols on the ND filter with the one on the back of the camera. When you do that, it's going to pop into place. It's going to magnetically seal here. It's a very strong magnet too. I did lose this filter once off my camera when I was driving in a car, but that's because I had this one stacked on top of the snow mist filter and I didn't have it secure with the magnet. So this filter went flying out of the car and I went back and got it out of the road. And all it has is just a little scratch on the back. The lens itself is fine. No problems there. That was a good durability test of the ND filter. As you can see right now, after I've put this filter on, the footage is a lot darker. And right now it's actually so dark that we probably can go back a little bit here. So if you look on the side dial here, you'll see numbers from 1 to 5. And that is how many stops of ND filter we have on here. So that affects how much light we're filtering with this. So as I turn this back toward 1, you'll see our image gets brighter. And right there, it's definitely overexposed, doesn't look good. So we're going to turn this back toward 5 again. And that's a little bit too dark if we go all the way to 5. So we're going to bring it back to about right there. I like how that looks. That looks really good. And we can go over here and do a little bit of a test with our preview LUT. That looks really good. And of course, if you need to fine tune a little further, you of course can bump up your ISO a little if you need to. There may be situations where you need your ISO up a little bit because it's a little bit of a darker day out. And the nice thing about this being variable is if you change directions here, you face a different direction, you may have to adjust it a little bit differently. And that's cool because you can easily adjust it right there. And of course, if you change your frames per second from 24 to 60, it's going to get darker because 60 frames per second uses a shutter speed of 120. So when you do that, you're going to probably have to lower this a little bit. So in this case, that's a good exposure right there, right about between 2 and 3. So if you do want to stack some filters, let me show you how to do that. I'm going to get the snow mist filter here. So when putting on the snow mist, I do like to put the snow mist on first because it's a little bit smaller. And that way you're not going to have it possibly moving around on your ND filter and getting in your frame. So you want to give this one a tug right here, and that's going to pop into place the same way. What we want to do is we then want to line up the lines on here the same way so that the magnets connect. And so that is our snow mist filter with our ND on the outside. It's not a super strong bond here, so keep that in mind. This outer one could disconnect. And then one other filter I want to show you how to use is the anamorphic filter. The blue anamorphic filter comes in this nice little case right here. And the reason for that is the blue anamorphic, it sticks out a lot. This lens is pretty big and pretty heavy. And this is what the lens looks like. So as you can see here, it's pretty thick. So the key with the anamorphic is it's got these two right here along the side where one of them is a smaller fitting and one of them is a little bit bigger. And you're going to line them up here on the back of the case with the 1x lens. So on the iPhone 15 Pro, the 1x lens is this one right down here. So if you look really closely, the bottom of it is a little bigger than the top gap. And what you're going to do is you're going to line these up right there. And once you do, you're going to twist this in that direction and it's going to lock into place. You can tug on it. It's going to be good there. This does have a UV filter on it. Keep that in mind. One thing you'll notice right away though, is your footage, it looks weird. So what you have to do is there's one setting in the Blackmagic Cam app that you want to change if you're using the anamorphic lens. Go down here to settings, go to camera, and where it says anamorphic de-squeeze, change this to 1.33. And what the Blackmagic app will do is it will de-squeeze the footage within your camera. So now if you take a look at it, the footage looks great there. It's got the proper ratios, everything looks good. Now the footage is overexposed because it is the middle of the day right now. So like I said, if you want to use this and keep your shutter angle, you're going to need to use this in lower lighting. or if you adjust your shutter angle, like to 43.2 there, it's workable. So you won't have that precise 180-degree shutter rule. You will have a little bit faster shutter speed and sharper frames, but you can still get some pretty good looking footage from this camera using the anamorphic if you want to, without using the firm 180-degree rule. And I'm going to take off the anamorphic. So to do that, we're just going to twist back this way. It's going to pop back off. And what you want to make sure you do when you take off the anamorphic is you want to put the setting back to the normal mode. You don't want to have the anamorphic desqueeze turned on. You want to set that back to none. Keep that in mind if you're switching back and forth. And one more I want to show you is the CPL. The CPL filter attaches in the same way. Just going to line up the white on the back here with the white on here. It's going to pop right into place. If I change the shutter angle here a little bit, you'll be able to see the effect this has. So let's go down here a little. So if I didn't have the filter on right here, see how the sky looks all washed out and kind of white? And the sky isn't that white. There is some blue today. But then if I pop this on, you can see there's much more blue in the sky there. If I go a little lower with the shutter angle, that difference becomes even more pronounced. Right there, see that? Pop it back on. And you can adjust the polarization effect too. So if you turn this right here, you can see it gets a little stronger or a little weaker. Keep that in mind. You can adjust the strength of the polarization to your liking. I like how that looks right there. So to get great footage with your iPhone 15 Pro, you don't have to have that entire set from Freewell, but the two that I recommend getting are the case and the variable ND filter. If you have those two, you're going to have what you need in order to get that cinematic motion blur with the 180-degree shutter rule. And that's really the key. You want to be able to get that no matter if it's the brightest day or a cloudy, overcast day. You want to be able to get that because it's going to really make your footage look extra, extra good. And your footage is not going to look like it came from a smartphone. So now that we've talked about settings, ND filters, and other special filters, it's time to go back to the editing station and take a look at how to edit and grade this footage to get really, really great results. And I don't have any LUTs or anything else for sale. I'm just going to show you how to edit this on your own. Apple does provide an Apple log to Rec 709 conversion LUT. So that LUT is free, and I'll show you where to get that as well. I'm going to do my edit today in Premiere Pro, but grading the iPhone 15 Pro footage is actually really easy, and it's not going to take long for me to show you how to do that. I want to keep it simple, but at the same time, I want to show you how to get the very best results when grading it. And there are a few key steps you need to take. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up here to New and Sequence, and we're just going to make sure the sequence settings are correct here. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to pick one of the 4K timelines where the settings are there by default. And we're just going to make sure the frame size is 3840 by 2160. That's for our 4K. We want to make sure the color space is Rec 709 with auto-tone map media. And we want to do maximum bit depth and maximum render quality. Codec, we can keep at Apple ProRes 422. And then the other thing we want to make sure is we want to make sure Lumetri Scopes is here, because we are going to use this when grading. If you don't see it there, go up to Window and check this main list right here. Make sure Lumetri Scopes is there. And while you're at it, make sure Lumetri Color is also there. We'll need that as well. And for your workspaces, make sure you're on color. That's going to offer the right options here on your screen for grading the footage. Next, we're going to go to File and we're going to go to Import. And I've already got the samples right here on my desktop. So we're going to do Control A and we're going to import them all. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag and drop all of these onto the timeline. It's going to tell me this because some of these are filmed in 4K 60. That way I can slow them down later on. So I'm going to say keep existing settings. Next step we want to take is go to File, New, and Adjustment Layer. And we're going to hit OK. The adjustment layer is what we're going to drop above our clips. This is going to be where we apply our grading to that adjustment layer, and then it's going to apply it to all of our clips, which is going to make this process much faster. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to import the Apple LUT. Now, this is a conversion LUT that Apple made available for the iPhone 15 Pro. And what this LUT does is it converts that Apple log into the Rec 709 color space. In fact, that LUT does most of the work for us. I have linked in the description to where you can get the LUT from Apple. The conversion LUT is free. So what we're going to do over here at Basic Correction Input LUT, we're going to go to here and we're going to click Browse. And I've actually put this LUT already on the desktop. It comes in this folder when you download it from Apple. And we want to use the Apple log to Rec 709-V1.0Q. Now watch this when I click open. Look how much that transformed it already. And that clip looks really good. I really like how that looks. Look at all of the detail there that the iPhone 15 Pro picked up on the tree, but we have that nice background blur also. That does not look like it came from a smartphone. That footage looks really good, and it's not overly sharp. The exposure is great on it. Everything looks really good there. And as you can see, when we apply that LUT, I'm going to go back here to none and watch the lumetri scopes over here when I apply it. You can see how it stretches things out. I'll move this over so you can see that. So right there, it brings a lot more detail to our shadows and a lot more to the highlights. And as you can see in this particular clip, we still have a little bit of room to go with the highlights where we could drag out a little bit more detail and then just a little bit in the shadows, not much. We're already about hitting 0 here, but highlights we could bring out a little more if we wanted more contrast with the background here with the foreground. What I usually like to do at this point is I like to look at my scopes and I like to do a little bit of adjusting. So I bring up the highlights a little bit and then the shadows, I'm going to bring those down slightly just to add a little more contrast to this. And highlights I'm going to bring back down to about 20 and shadows I'm going to bring down to about -20. And then whites, I'm going to bring those up a little bit. And we just want to keep our eye on our scopes, make sure nothing is clipping above 100 or going below 0. I'm going to bring down blacks just a little bit, but there's not much we can work with there. So I'm going to go up just a little bit there. And we can go under curves also. And if you want to do a little bit of grading here, I like to bring this down a little bit. This represents the shadows. And then up here, we're going to bring it up a little bit. This represents the highlights. Sometimes I will just go to curves first and do that. You can do it either way. You can do the curves first, or you can do the adjustments I made up here. So we can bring these back to their defaults, and I can just do the curves also. That also works. So I'm going to bring this down just a little bit more, and I'm going to bring it up, the highlights up here, a little bit more as well. And that creates just a little bit additional contrast. And then one of the keys that I like to do here to give it an extra cinematic look is the red line here. I like to add my 3 dots. And then down here in the shadows, I like to bring this down just a little bit. And if you look, it adds that subtle, kind of darkish green look to the footage. That gives that classic cinematic look to the footage. And it makes it look even nicer. And then up here in the highlights, I just bring this up just a little bit, the red line. And that adds a little bit more contrast. Our highlights have a little bit of that slight red in them, and our shadows have a little bit of that slight green in them. So already, I love how that looks. So what we want to do here too is we want to drag this along, and we want to check out some other clips, because the one grade that we made on this one clip may not apply to all of them. So as we drag this along, we want to look at our lumetri scopes and make sure nothing is above 100 and nothing is below 0 here. So this one, that also looks really good. No problems there. And I really like how that clip looks. So this clip right here is one of them that I'm going to slow down. It's a 4K 60 clip. I'm going to slow it down to 4K 24. So I'll show you an example there. I'm just going to drag these clips out of the way so we can slow it down. So since I have a 4K 60 clip on a 4K 24 frames per second timeline, I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to go to speed duration, and I'm going to do 40%. 40% is the max that you can slow down a 60 frames per second clip on a 24 frames per second timeline. If you had this on a 30 frames per second timeline, you would go to 50%. But since this is on 24, I can get a little bit extra slow out of it. So now when you look at this, when you look at my pan, got it nice, slow, and smooth there. That looks phenomenal. Look at that reflection in the water. The iPhone did a fabulous job capturing that scene. So what we also want to check out is any scenes that have a human subject in them. We want to make sure the skin tones look good. So let's take a look here. So if you look at my hand has a little bit of a green tone to it. And that's because of what we did with our adjustment layers up here with the red one. Easy to correct. What you want to do is you go down to color wheels and match and midtones. Midtones are where the skin tones are found. You want to click on the plus sign and you want to drag up a little bit toward this red area. And you don't want to do too much. If you do that, that really messes with the image. Double click, it resets it. But you want to head up a little bit there. And I'm going to do right about there. So now if we look at that, that looks a lot better. My skin has a natural tone that it should have. And if we look ahead here, I had the mist filter from Freewell stacked with the ND filter. Really love how that looks. So my wife's skin tone there looks natural. It looks good. Another sample scene. Love that cinematic motion blur in there. That also looks great. So if you do want to add any more saturation or a little bit of sharpness to your footage, you can do that. But honestly, I really like how that looks. I don't feel like it needs either of those added. I think it looks really great as is. Just going to go through a few more clips here. If you look at that, in my opinion, the sharpness looks great. It's not overly sharp. And even in this scene, we don't have anything going above 100. The sky was just kind of a high deck of cirrus clouds, kind of a whitish color. So that is actually what the sky looked like. That's not highlight clipping. And our shadows are good down here as well. So in my case, I'm not going to add any saturation, but if you wanted to, you would go up here where it says saturation. You could go up like to 110. Maybe try that out if you want a slightly more saturated look. And if you wanted to add sharpness, go under creative here, and where it says sharpen, you could click here, do something like 10 to add just a little bit. But again, I'm going to put that back to 0. And by the way, this is neat to see the preview here. This is what we started with, and this is what we have after editing. That log footage grades really nicely. And once you're done editing, all you have to do is export the footage at that point. So you go to export media, and the export settings are going to be pretty straightforward. If you want to upload it to YouTube or most other social media sharing, you want to do H.264 for the format. For the video, just click match source. Down here under more, click render at maximum depth, use maximum render quality. And down here under VBR one pass, I like to do about 56 megabits per second for the target bitrate. That's kind of right in the middle of that range that YouTube recommends. And then all you have to do is click export here, and it's going to start exporting. And that's how you grade Apple log footage.